anyway, back to Oakland. Eventually, it became a drawing card of a very intense textile community. And it started way back with many people on the staff of the University of California at Berkeley. Some of them came from Washington State. Leah Miller. Lee Miller. L-E-A, but it's pronounced Lee. Lee Miller. Was on the faculty at Washington State, and in the 1930s, there was a law against nepotism, and her husband was also part of the University of Washington, and they could not be at the same university, so she left. She and her husband came down to UC Berkeley, where nepotism, to hire your married partner at the same school, was apparently approved. Now, at the University of Washington, Ed Rossbach was one of her students. And I think he made quite an impression on her, because when she got to Berkeley, she said, "You must come down here." Also, at the University of Washington was Katherine Westphal. And Katherine and Ed got acquainted. And also at the University of Washington was his graduate student assistant, Jacqueline Orr Larson. Now, right there you have a trio, creme de la creme, as Inez just said. It truly was a coming together, a meeting of geniuses in our field of textiles. So they all decided, well, Jack decided he would go to New York. He wanted to be in the commercial textile business. But Ed came down to Berkeley, and Katherine with him, and he was hired on the faculty of the University of California, Berkeley, to teach in the environmental design program. Well, in fact, it wasn't environmental design yet. There was a transition in the design program, home economics / home economics, as there often was a combination of those two. And Anna Gayton was the chair, and one of her strong loves was an anthropological point of view, what had been created by indigenous people. And of course the Lowy collection was already started, and this was so fascinating to Ed and Katherine that it became a focus for both of them. And I think the rest is history, really. The blending of anthropological objects, artifacts, ways of looking at the world, ways of dealing with natural materials, all of those things are rooted in that initial blending and through the collections at the Kroger Museum. So this is a piece by Ed Rossbach, E. Gasuri. It's pictorial ikat. It's not just random patterning. It's a very defined portrait, mirrored portrait with indigo dye. So we have these little embroidered, you'll have to forgive these little embroidered borders on the screen. I guess there's no way to eliminate them.
Not as images, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so Ed's only responsible for the centered panel, E. Gasuri. But that also indicates how early on he became fascinated with textiles from cultures that were very strong in textiles. Peruvian textiles, Asian textiles. All of this, even though University of Washington had connections with a lot of indigenous cultures in the Northwest, I think this opened up a whole world for him and for Katherine as well. This is another piece by Rossbach, a close-up, a detail, and you can see the complexity, the delicacy of the patterning as it emerges out of this ikat. And I'm using these terms if there's something you don't understand or have not heard of, just raise your hand and I can try to define it a little bit more, but ikat is tying off areas, dyeing the yarn, and then weaving them together. So you get these offset delineations. There's no crisp, clear outline. This, on the other hand, is Katherine Westphal. Katherine was a painter, an artist. I think she sewed from a very young age. She was a great sewer. She wore things that she had sewn and made herself. And the first time I met Katherine, I was just coming on faculty at UC Davis, coming from UCLA, and they said, well, you must come early because we need to have a faculty retreat. And I thought, faculty retreat? Well, being a graduate student, I didn't know what the faculty retreat was. And they said, well, we're going up to Lake Tahoe. We'll be near Reno. We'll be near the border. You'll be able to gamble and, you know, have fun. And I thought, really, faculty retreat? What am I doing? So when we got on the bus to bounce our way up to Lake Tahoe, Katherine was there. She had been a part-time faculty member at UC Davis, but she was coming on to be more full-time. And she was wearing a suit that she had made, a jacket and a skirt of patchwork madras striped fabrics. Well, you know, intense madras striping, and Katherine got a hold of that and several other patterns and joined them together in this wild patchwork little prim suit. And I thought, this is such an interesting person, because my specialty had been fashion. And I'm up here, Katherine's probably this tall. So I thought, this is an intriguing person, and I didn't know her yet. I hadn't met her before this moment. And we bonded immediately, and she became sort of the philosophical leader of our design program. She always understood the importance of creativity and not to be sucked in by commercialism, by the commercial world. And it was always very inspiring to be with her. Could also be exciting. You never knew what she would say, or what she would wear, or what she would be doing. And so it was always a remarkable learning experience. So this is a quilt that she did in batik. It's a figure, as you can see, perhaps inspired by Egyptian, the cone-like shape of the headdress indicates that. But you can see also her love of pattern, just random pattern. This would be a batik. She used a wax for a while, but then she discovered Inco, paste resist. And this changed her life. She didn't have to iron out the wax. And she could work on velvet and not have it destroyed by hot wax. So Inco resist, which is water soluble but resistant to Inco dye, became her main medium. And Inco dye may have died out by now, I'm not even sure, but it was a light sensitive, light reactive dye that you could use like paint, like a watercolor, but it might look gray as you put it on the cloth. And then with light, with sunlight, or even could be fluorescent light, the color would come up. So all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is blue. You have to read the label to know what the color is going to be. So it was not a visual way of necessarily blending color or deciding on color. So it took this kind of twist in your brain to work with. But she loved it and introduced it to her students, and could get these wild patterns that wouldn't run together with the Inco resist, but still maintaining, in this case, velvet pané. She also was prolific at designing things from a theme. The Tutankhamun series, a new dalmatic for King Tut, as she called this series, started out as drawings, and She was always drawing in the faculty meetings, always drawing. I was taking notes on what the chairman was saying, so I could remember what we were supposed to be doing, but she was drawing, always drawing. And some of her sketches, her drawings, did turn into pieces on cloth. But she was, I would say, close to a workaholic, like her husband, Ed Rossbach. And so these are just a few of her sketches for this series that she did on a penne, polyester penne. They had traveled to Egypt, and wherever they traveled, she came back and she would do a series of pieces inspired by her travels and her tours. So when she would ask her students to do 10 sketches, they would say, 10? How about 2? And she'd say, no, you'll keep getting more ideas the more sketches you do. So on and on it goes. She also loved collage. And this is from her series of wearable furniture. And we thought, wearable furniture, is that sort of an inflatable thing? She said, oh, could be, maybe, probably, yes. And so she would go through a magazine and cut out things that appealed to her, things that had pattern, color, and then juxtapose them. The sofa, turned upside down, becomes this skirt here. You can see the pillows loaded up. The tassels suddenly out of scale to the body, to the figure. And then, of course, the dog, front and center. She had dogs. She loved her dogs, and so did Ed. Ed would often be just sitting, listening to a conversation, rarely speaking out, but he usually either had a dog on his lap or some piece of basketry that he was working on, something creative, but saying very little. He was a man of very few spoken words for somebody that was such a fabulous writer. He had very few spoken words. So while Katherine was amusing herself, Ed would be knotting, twisting, twining, looping, and she would be pasting, gluing, cutting, and collaging. She had a great sense of humor, and I really think the two of them combined created a wonderful milieu, a foundation for the students at UC Berkeley, and all the students at Davis as well, who circulated through their courses, and created a community that was very amenable to experimentation, to humor, to just pure enjoyment and indulging oneself, not worrying about, well, what will the critics say? Well, will the gallery representative like this? They weren't, that was not their criteria at all. And so the series goes on and on. So if you went to visit Katherine, she would always have little piles of scraps, papers, things that she knew what she was going to do something with, but very often just looked like, well, that's headed for the trash bin, but oh no, 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 too fast. Don't throw anything away.